Every other year, AWRT members produce a documentary on a special theme. And this year, we chose Women Making News. And the result is the film we are going to see now, The Velvet Revolution.
I was speaking in a very Syrian dialect, and he was insisting. I showed him my Syrian ID, and he was like, "This is a fake. You're a foreign." Like, why? He said, "You can't be a Syrian and a journalist at the same time, and a woman."
If this is a century of the media, then this decade has become one of the most difficult for the media. When I came on board as the executive producer, I said, where do I begin this story? How shall we go at this topic? Patriarchy, newsrooms. I moved beyond that and decided to look at where women are now in this world, women journalists. How are they actually navigating the global space as they do their work?
I always saw myself as a human rights advocate in some ways, although as a journalist you have to take slightly a step back. And my decision to move from journalism, which was really a surprise, I think, to many people, and it only happened last year. So I'm a very new human rights advocate, if you like, in that sort of formal sense. But the reason was several, and I think one of the big ones, of course, was the fact that I was a Middle East correspondent that could no longer get to report from the Middle East. I always was based in the last 15 years in the Middle East, from Damascus to Lebanon to the Gaza Strip, and then the last 5 years from Egypt. But I found that increasingly the space was getting smaller. I had to report about Syria from Turkey. I had to report about Yemen from either Saudi Arabia, and that's when you were allowed into Saudi Arabia, or Dubai, or somewhere remote like that. And increasingly, the places that we could actually travel to and go to, as men and women journalists, I think, became smaller.
When I left Zimbabwe, it wasn't actually because I was fleeing the country, but I was going to study in the United Kingdom. So after my course, the situation in Zimbabwe was deteriorating. Journalists were getting arrested, they were getting beaten up, and then about 6 of us decided to set up the country's first independent radio station broadcasting on shortwave. And so because the government couldn't really touch us from London, they decided to put us on a banned list. That list also included members of the British government, and then on that list there were 6 Zimbabweans. Some opposition parliamentarians asked, in Parliament in Zimbabwe, how could you ban your own citizens from returning to the country? And the Justice Minister at that time said that we were free to return to Zimbabwe, but in the country's prisons.
The Philippines is ranked as the second most dangerous country for journalists by the International Federation of Journalists. So for the past 25 years, there have been 146 killings of journalists, and I have witnessed that personally throughout the years. At least one of them was my personal colleague, a campus journalist who was writing on human rights violations in Cotabato, and she was shot by the military. And it continues under the current administration, and the only difference is that it's even more dangerous now because there's actually a climate of fear because of the things that he says. It's not just words, because it happens. Like, there are now more than 7,000 people, drug suspects killed. Journalists, instead of, we have many support actually, but some of them are being pilloried by the supporters of the president by saying that for reporting on the drug killings, they're being accused of being paid hacks. They're accused of being irresponsible. And the women journalists in particular, they even get threats online, particularly. And you know how it is when we are threatened online. We are threatened with many things, including harm to our families, including rape.
What I'm struck by when I'm listening to both your stories is just this incredible crackdown that we're seeing, not just on journalists. I think it's on anyone that challenges the narrative of the state. And whether that's human rights advocates or lawyers or journalists, we're all somewhat in the same boat. And I think that what's really stark is that we're sitting here discussing this in the United States, where we have a president that is doing a very similar thing. I mean, there are laws here in place that stop that kind of extreme crackdown. But at the end, it's still we still have a government or administration in place in the U.S. that is really challenging any journalist that tries to create a different story or narrative as to what's going on now.
The thing is, journalists are being killed every day. Now, 52 may sound like a small number to you in a year. It isn't. Because this is also, don't forget, the most protected group in a sense. So to be able to kill that powerhouse requires a lot of guts from the state and non-state players. One of the questions that I was asked in Delhi is that, what do you want this film to do? And I said, I want solidarity among journalists to return. And the second is that ownership from civil society towards journalists, and particularly women journalists who are doing an amazing amount of work. All these women are doing such amazing work, but quietly, without thumping and on their chest and saying, I'm the greatest. And I think that's so beautiful, And each one of them, in turn, represents some 10,000 other women, who are there in all these countries working. So in a sense, we need ownership of the media again from civil society. Otherwise, how do we do our job?